Some fathers look at their daughters and see themselves reflected back. Mine looked at me and saw a stranger. For 28 years, Warren Hargrove studied my face the way a man studies a counterfeit bill, turning it over, holding it up to the light, searching for the flaw that would confirm what he already believed. My blonde hair, my blue eyes, the way my features refused to mirror his dark, heavy brow and deep-set brown eyes. To him, I wasn't his child. I was a confession my mother never made. And the cruelest part? He never once kept it quiet. It was a Sunday dinner at my parents' house in Fairfield, Connecticut. The kind of dinner where the silverware is polished, but the conversation cuts deeper than any knife on that table. My mother, Carolyn, sat clutching her linen napkin like it was the only thing keeping her tethered to the chair. My grandmother, Vivienne, watched Warren from across the table with the sharp, patient gaze of a hawk tracking a snake through tall grass. My brother Brendan, Warren's golden boy, the one who got the jawline, the coloring, the approval, kept his eyes fixed on his plate like a man trying to disappear. Then Warren cleared his throat. And I knew. The way you know a storm is coming before the first crack of thunder. You feel it in your chest before you hear it in the sky. I won't be attending your wedding, Sloane. He slid a folded document across the table. A consent form for a DNA paternity test. His signature already scrawled at the bottom in thick black ink, like he'd been practicing. Take the test, he said. His voice was steady, almost rehearsed, like he'd been waiting years for this moment, and honestly, he probably had. Make the results public to the whole family. If you're mine, I'll be there. I'll even apologize. He smiled, but the smile stopped at his mouth. His eyes stayed exactly where they always were, cold, certain, already decided. But we both know what the test will show. I didn't sign that paper. I didn't cry. I didn't give him the satisfaction of watching me crumble the way my mother had crumbled 1,000 times before me. I simply folded my hands in my lap and said, "Thank you for the reminder, Warren. I'll remember this." And I meant every single word. Here's what you need to understand about growing up as the wrong kind of daughter in Warren Hargrove's house. The cruelty wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it was ordinary, every day, woven into the fabric of our lives so seamlessly that sometimes you'd almost miss it. The way you stop noticing a scar once it's been on your skin long enough. I was 7 the first time I understood I was different. Not because anyone sat me down and explained it, but because children are smart. They feel the temperature shift when they walk into a room. They notice which child gets the second helping, the softer voice, the arms that open without hesitation. At 12, I wanted to join the school volleyball team. I brought the permission slip home with the kind of hope only a 12-year-old can carry. Wide open, completely unprotected. Warren looked at the form, looked at me, and said, "I'm not investing in someone else's kid." He said it the way you'd decline a subscription you never signed up for. Casually. Brendan got new baseball cleats that same week. When I got accepted into nursing school, the proudest moment of my young life, Warren sat at that same dining table, in that same chair, and told me, "Your real father can pay for yours." So I took out loans. I picked up double shifts at a diner where the coffee was burnt and the tips were lousy. I spent 6 years clawing my way through a program that should have taken 4, and I graduated with $60,000 in debt and a degree I had earned without a single dollar, a single word of encouragement from the man who was supposed to be my father. That diploma? It tasted like freedom, but it also tasted like grief, because no child, no matter how strong they become, should have to earn love like it's a wage. The night before I left for college, my grandmother Vivienne pulled me into the hallway. She gripped my wrist, not gently, not the way grandmothers usually touch you, firm, urgent, like she was pressing something important into my bones. "Keep every document from the hospital where you were born," she said. "Your birth certificate, any paperwork, all of it." I blinked. Why? She held my gaze for a long, waited moment. "I have a feeling we might need them someday." I didn't understand. Not then. But I kept the papers, tucked them into a fireproof box in the back of my closet, and carried them with me through every apartment, every move, every chapter of my life. 18 years later, I'd finally learn why she told me to. That night, after the dinner, after the DNA ultimatum, after Warren's smirk, I drove back to my apartment in Hartford, with my hands locked at 10 and 2, and my jaw clenched so tight I could feel the pressure behind my eyes. Declan was waiting on the couch, laptop open to floor plans for a client. He was an architect, the kind of man who believed every broken thing could be redesigned into something beautiful. He looked up when I walked in, and he knew. He always knew. "Maybe you should just do it," he said quietly. "Take the test. Prove him wrong once and for all." I set down my wine glass and stared at the modest diamond on my left hand. Declan had designed that ring himself, based on a sketch I'd drawn years ago in a journal I didn't even know he'd read. That's the kind of man he was. The kind who pays attention when no one else does. "It's not about proving him wrong anymore," I said. "It's about freeing my mother." Because here's the part that kept me up at night. 5 years earlier, my grandmother had called me at 2 in the morning. She'd found Carolyn in the bathroom with an empty bottle of sleeping pills. The paramedics got there in time. Barely. Just barely. And Warren? He never apologized. He never acknowledged what 23 years of accusations had carved out of that woman's spirit. My mother gave that man 35 years of complete faithfulness, and he repaid her with 28 years of calling her a liar, 28 years of treating her love like a crime scene. So 2 weeks later, I walked into a certified genetics lab in Hartford carrying 3 DNA samples, mine, my mother's, which she'd given willingly, and Warren's, taken from a hairbrush he kept in the guest bathroom. I filled out the paperwork, I paid the fee, and I waited. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday night at 9:47 p.m., the results landed in my inbox. I entered my password, verified my identity, opened the PDF, and I read it 3 times, because the first 2 times, the words simply refused to make sense. Subject A shows a 0% genetic match with Warren Hargrove. That part, I'd expected. I'd braced for it even. 28 years of hearing you don't belong will do that to a person. But then came the second line. Subject A shows a 0% genetic match with Carolyn Hargrove. I stopped breathing. Not his daughter. Not her daughter either. My mother had never cheated. Warren had been dead wrong about that for nearly 3 decades. But if Carolyn hadn't had an affair, if she'd been faithful every single day of her marriage, the way she'd sworn on everything sacred, then how in the world was I not her biological child? The floor beneath my life had just opened wide, and I was falling. I called the lab's after-hours line that same night. My voice didn't sound like mine. Too thin, too high, the voice of a woman standing at the edge of something she can't yet name. I demanded to speak to a technician, demanded they rerun the samples, demanded someone tell me the machine had glitched, the files had been swapped, that there was some perfectly reasonable explanation for why the woman who held me through fevers and read me bedtime stories and nearly died from the weight of accusations she didn't deserve wasn't my biological mother. The technician was patient, methodical. He walked me through every step, no contamination, no mislabeling, no margin for error. The results were the results. I sat in my car in the apartment parking lot for 45 minutes after I hung up. The engine off, the windows fogging, my hands resting on the steering wheel like I was still driving somewhere, even though I had absolutely no idea where to go. The next morning, I drove to Fairfield. I didn't call ahead. I just showed up on the doorstep the way you show up when the world has tilted sideways and there's only one person you need to see. My mother opened the door in her bathrobe, coffee in hand, her reading glasses pushed up into her hair. I handed her my phone with the report glowing on the screen and watched the color leave her face in stages, like watching a candle burn down in real time. "This is wrong," she whispered. Her hands were shaking so hard the phone nearly slipped from her fingers. "I gave birth to you. I was in labor for 14 hours. I felt you. You were red and screaming and mine." I took her ice-cold hands in mine and held them the way she'd held mine 1,000 times before. Steady, sure, the way you hold someone when the ground is moving. "I believe you," I said. "Which means there's only one explanation. Something happened at that hospital. Someone switched us." Her eyes went wide, and then they went somewhere far away. Back 28 years, to a delivery room, to a clock on the wall, to a moment she'd replayed in her mind so many times it had worn smooth as riverstone. 11:47, she murmured. That's what the birth record says, but I didn't deliver until 11:58. I remember the clock. The doctor made a joke about almost being a leap day baby. 11 minutes. 11 minutes between the time on my birth record and the time my mother actually gave birth. Something had happened in those 11 minutes. Something someone had been hiding for nearly 3 decades. And then I remembered. My grandmother's voice in the hallway, all those years ago, keep every document. I have a feeling we might need them someday. She hadn't just had a feeling. She'd known something was wrong. She'd sensed it the way only a mother, only a grandmother can sense when the story doesn't quite fit, when the edges don't line up, when something precious has been quietly, invisibly disturbed. I called Ruth Calloway 5 times in 3 days. Every call went straight to voicemail. A deadline. A ghost. By the 6th attempt, I changed my approach. I stopped being polite. Mrs. Calloway, I have certified, legally admissible DNA evidence proving a baby was switched at St. Mary's Hospital on March 15, 1997. I'm not looking to blame you. I just need to know who I am. If you don't call me back, my next call will be to a lawyer. 2 hours later, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. A text. Thursday, 2 p.m. Riverside Diner, Bridgeport. Come alone. She was smaller than I'd imagined. 72 years old. Silver hair pulled into a tight bun, sitting in the corner booth with her back against the wall like a woman who'd been looking over her shoulder for a very long time. Her hands trembled against her coffee cup, not from age, I realized, but from something heavier, something she'd been carrying for 28 years. She looked up when I slid into the seat across from her, and her eyes, her tired, guilt-worn eyes, filled immediately with tears. "You look just like her," she said softly. "Claire, your biological mother. Same hair, same eyes, same way of holding your chin up like you're daring the world to try you." She reached into her purse and pulled out a worn leather journal, its pages yellowed and soft with age. Her shift log from March 15, 1997. She opened it to a flagged page and slid it across the table like a confession she'd been rehearsing for decades. I read it, and the 11 minutes finally told their story. 11:47 p.m. Baby girl Far 1, born to Carolyn Hargrove. 11:58 p.m. Baby girl 2, born to Claire Holloway. 12:32 a.m. Training nurse mixed up infants after bathing. Error realized at 2:15 a.m. Both families had already bonded. 2:45 a.m. Meeting with hospital administrator. Decision made to correct records, not families. NDA required for all staff present. I read it twice, 3 times. Each time the words hit harder, not because they were shocking, but because they were so small, so bureaucratic, so clean, as if 2 lives, 2 entire lives, hadn't been rerouted in the middle of the night by a mistake and a meeting and a decision made by people who would never have to live with the consequences. "They knew," I whispered. "They knew that night, and they covered it up." Ruth nodded. A tear slid down the deep crease beside her nose. "I was 24 years old. They threatened my license, my pension. I had 2 kids of my own to feed. I told myself the babies were too young to know the difference, that it would cause more harm to switch them back. I told myself that for 28 years. Her voice splintered. I never once believed it. She pulled one more thing from her purse. A printed social media profile, a woman my age staring back at me from the screen. Brown hair, brown eyes, a wide familiar smile that made my breath catch because I'd seen that exact smile on my brother Brendan's face 1,000 times. "Her name is Paige Holloway," Ruth said quietly. "She's 28, lives in Springfield, Massachusetts." She paused. "She is your mother's biological daughter, the child Carolyn actually gave birth to." I stared at the photo, at this stranger who was not a stranger at all. This woman who had my mother's blood running through her veins, who had grown up in another house, another life, another story, while I grew up in hers. 2 girls, 2 cribs, 1 mistake no one had the courage to correct. I wrote the message to Paige 17 times before I finally hit send. 17 drafts, 17 attempts to say hello. I think I'm living your life, and you might be living mine without sounding completely insane. 24 hours later, my phone rang. "Is this Sloan?" The voice was shaky, uncertain, but something in it felt like recognition, like hearing a song you've never heard before and somehow already knowing the chorus. My whole life, Paige said slowly. People told me I don't look like my parents. My dad used to joke that maybe the hospital made a mistake. A long, trembling pause. I guess it wasn't a joke after all. We talked for 3 hours that night. By the end, we'd laughed and cried and sat through long silences that didn't feel uncomfortable, they felt earned. And we'd agreed to take another DNA test. This one comparing Paige's sample to Warren and Carolyn. The results would arrive in 10 days, just in time for my engagement party. And when they came, clear, undeniable, printed in black and white, the numbers told the story Warren had refused to hear for 28 years. Paige Holloway, 99.87% genetic match with Warren Hargrove, 99.88% genetic match with Carolyn Hargrove. She was theirs. She had always been theirs. The daughter Warren had been searching for, the proof he'd been demanding. She'd been living 2 hours away in Springfield, Massachusetts, her entire life. Not because Carolyn had betrayed him, not because anyone had lied, but because a hospital made a mistake at 12:32 in the morning and then chose silence over truth. And now? Now it was time to break that silence wide open. The engagement party was held at my grandmother Vivian's estate, a sprawling property with stone walls and climbing roses and the kind of quiet elegance that made you feel like the world outside had agreed to pause for a few hours. 60 guests arrived in cocktail attire, champagne flutes already circulating on silver trays. Every cousin, every aunt, every old family friend, including every single person who had received Warren's accusatory email months earlier, the one where he told our entire extended family that Carolyn was a liar and I was proof of it. They were all there. Every witness he'd recruited for my mother's humiliation. And he had no idea they were about to witness his. Warren arrived late, of course. He wore a designer suit and a smirk that could cut glass, the look of a man who believed the evening belonged to him. He thought this was his victory lap. He thought the DNA results had vindicated every terrible thing he'd ever said, every birthday he'd ruined, every graduation he'd skipped, every time he'd looked at me and seen nothing worth loving. He had no idea what was coming. Halfway through the evening, he made his move. He took the microphone from the band's singer with the casual confidence of a man who's never once questioned whether he deserved the floor. He pulled a folded printout from his jacket pocket, my DNA results, the ones showing 0% matches, and he read them aloud. Every number, every cold, clinical line. His voice carried across the garden like a verdict. Then he turned to Carolyn, who stood frozen near the dessert table, her knuckles white around the stem of her glass. You lied to me, Carolyn. You lied to everyone. The silence that followed was absolute. 60 people holding their breath, my mother's chin trembling, the cicadas in the garden louder than any human voice, and then I moved. I walked to the stage. Not fast, not slow, steady. The way my mother had taught me to walk through hard things, chin up, shoulders back, one foot in front of the other, even when the ground is shaking beneath you. I took the microphone from Warren's hand, the way you'd take a match from a child who doesn't understand fire. You're right, I said. My voice didn't waver. I wouldn't let it. The DNA test shows I'm not your biological daughter, and I'm not Mom's biological daughter either. I let that land. Let the murmurs ripple through the crowd. But not because Mom had an affair. I nodded toward the side door, and Paige stepped through. 28 years old, brown hair, brown eyes, a jawline that was unmistakably, undeniably Warren Hargrove's, so obvious, so startlingly clear that I heard someone in the crowd gasp before I even said her name. This is Paige Holloway, I said. She was born 11 minutes before me at St. Mary's Hospital on the same night I was born. A training nurse mixed up 2 babies after bathing them. The hospital discovered the mistake that same night and covered it up to avoid a lawsuit. The wall-mounted display behind me flickered to life. Paige's DNA results filled the screen in numbers large enough for every person in that garden to read. 99.97% genetic match with Warren Hargrove. 99.998% genetic match with Carolyn Hargrove. She is your biological daughter, Warren." The murmurs became whispers. The whispers became silence. And the silence became something heavier, the weight of 60 people realizing they were watching a man's entire belief system collapse in real time. "And this," I continued, gesturing toward the far corner where a small, silver-haired woman stood clutching a folder against her chest, "is Ruth Calloway, the head nurse who was on duty that night. She has a notarized statement confirming everything." Ruth stepped forward. Her voice was thin, shaky, but clear enough to reach every corner of that garden. "Mr. Hargrove, I was there. I watched it happen. Your wife never betrayed you. Never. The hospital made us all sign non-disclosure agreements. They told us it would cause more harm to switch the babies back. I've lived with that decision every day since." Her voice cracked wide open. "I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner." I looked at Warren, and for the first time in my life, I didn't see suspicion in his eyes. I didn't see judgment. I didn't see the cold, calculating certainty that had poisoned every moment of my childhood. I saw a man watching 28 years of conviction burn to the ground around him. His hands gripped the edge of the platform, his face drained to white, not slowly, not in stages, but all at once, like someone had pulled a plug. His knees buckled. He caught himself on one knee, chest heaving, his breath coming in short, ragged pulls. "I didn't know," he whispered. "How could I have known?" I let the question hang there for a moment, let it twist in the air the way his accusations had twisted through our lives for nearly 3 decades. "You could have trusted her," I said quietly. "You could have looked for other explanations instead of assuming the worst about the woman who loved you. You had 28 years to ask a different question, Warren. You just never wanted to." And then Carolyn moved. My mother, the woman who had spent decades shrinking, apologizing, swallowing her truth because no one would believe it, stepped forward. Her heels clicked against the hardwood floor with a rhythm I'd never heard from her before. Steady, deliberate. The sound of a woman who was done being small. 28 years, she said. Her voice was stronger than I had ever heard it. Clearer. Like she'd been saving this voice, keeping it locked away for exactly this moment. "I stayed because I loved you. Because I believed that someday you would trust me. Because I thought loyalty meant something to you the way it meant something to me." She turned to face the crowd. Every cousin, every aunt, every person who had whispered behind her back, who had wondered, who had half believed Warren's story because it was easier than questioning a man who spoke with such certainty. "You owe me an apology in front of every person who received that email. You owe Sloan an apology for every birthday you ruined, every graduation you ignored, every single moment you made her feel like she didn't belong in her own family. And you owe Paige—" Her voice softened, trembled, but did not break. "An apology for being the father she deserved, but never had." Then she turned her back on him, walked away from the stage, away from the man she'd given 35 years to, and crossed the garden to where Paige stood. This stranger with her brown eyes and her uncertain smile, and her whole life lived in the wrong house. Carolyn reached out and took Paige's hands the way she'd taken mine 1,000 times, gently, completely, the way a mother holds her child when she finally finds her. "Hello," she said softly. "I'm your mother. I'm so sorry it took so long to find you." Paige broke, and Carolyn caught her. Warren's apology, when it finally came, was 3 words, 28 years overdue. I was wrong. He looked at me, and for the first time in my life, something behind his eyes shifted. Not just guilt, not just shame, but the devastating recognition that he had wasted the one thing you can never get back. "I'll repay your student loans," he said. "All 60,000. It's not enough, but it's a start." Then he turned to Paige, this stranger who carried his blood, his jawline, his daughter's rightful place in the world, and his voice shattered like something dropped from a great height. "I've missed everything. Your first steps, your graduations, your entire life. That's something I'll regret until the day I die." Paige wiped her eyes, took a breath, and said something so simple, so generous, it nearly brought me to my knees. We can start now. If you're willing to actually be a father instead of a judge. 2 months later, I married Declan in my grandmother's rose garden. My mother walked me down the aisle. Not Warren, my mother. She wore champagne silk and held her head high, and her steps were steady, truly steady, for the first time in decades. She didn't look over her shoulder. She didn't check Warren's face for approval. She simply walked beside me, her arm linked through mine, and when she kissed my cheek at the altar, she whispered, "You saved me, sweetheart. Don't you ever forget that." Paige stood with my bridesmaids, her brown eyes bright, her smile wide and real. Claire Holloway, my biological mother, a woman I was only beginning to know, sat in the front row, dabbing her eyes with a tissue and beaming at me like she'd been watching me my whole life from somewhere just out of sight. And when Vivian rose to give a toast, her voice carried across the entire garden the way truth always does. Not loud, but undeniable. "This wedding is not just about two people," she said, lifting her glass until the sunlight caught the champagne and turned it gold. "It's about two families finally finding their way back to the truth." She paused, smiled. Let her eyes move across every face in that garden, the old wounds, the new beginnings, the imperfect, extraordinary mess of loving people who are learning, finally, to love each other honestly. "To truth," she said, "however long it takes." "To truth," the garden echoed back. And I drank to that. Here's what I know now, standing on the other side of all of it. DNA doesn't make a family. A double helix doesn't teach you to ride a bike. A genetic marker doesn't sit beside your hospital bed at 3 a.m. or sing you off-key lullabies or fight for you when the world says you don't belong. The woman who held my hand during nightmares, that is my mother. The woman who taught me to read, who braided my hair before school, who stayed married to a man who turned her life into a battlefield just so she could keep our family under one roof. That is my mother. Not biology. Not a test result. Not a percentage on a lab report. Love. Stubborn, illogical, relentless love. Carolyn Hargrove chose me every single day for 28 years, even when the man beside her told her I wasn't worth choosing. She never wavered. She never once made me feel like I was anything less than hers. And this child I'm carrying now, I press my hand against the swell of my belly, and I make a promise that needs no DNA to enforce. This child will know they are loved from the very first heartbeat. Without condition, without suspicion, without a single moment of doubt. Because that is the only proof that has ever mattered.